You know, I just can't get too little of the Quartering Act, the fourth of the Intolerable Acts passed by the British Parliament on this date, June 2nd, back in 1774. Now, I've talked about this before, about this act as an example of how when you're in a hole you should stop digging, and the British Parliament didn't. But I want to come back to it because it's an extraordinary example of how the American Revolution was triggered by the violation of British liberties, of English liberties, of liberties that were dear also to the hearts of those who founded Canada. Now, the Quartering Act was not the least popular of the four Intolerable Acts. It's hard to see how it would be when other ones closed the port of Boston, revoked the Charter of Massachusetts, and basically denied the right of trial by jury. But it was a very serious business. It was actually the second Quartering Act. The first one was passed in 1765. And it stoked paranoia among the colonists, in part because the British government had never passed legislation allowing it to quarter troops in the houses of citizens. That's what Quartering Acts basically do. It had never passed those while the French were still a military threat to the colonies in British North America. After the 7 Years' War and the French power is broken, suddenly they do this, and a lot of people are asking, who do they think the enemy is? And it's easy to cast this as one of these British versus American things, the way a lot of people do see the American Revolution. But it wasn't that at all. It was state versus citizen, because the objection to standing armies and the quartering of troops is so deeply rooted in British history that it's expressly listed in the British Bill of Rights in 1688. One of the complaints against James II was that he kept standing armies and he quartered troops in the houses of citizens. And that connects to a long struggle between the executive branch in particular, the central government generally in Britain, and the citizens over who would control the power of the sword, without which the power of the purse is empty. The kings always wanted to establish standing armies. They always wanted to have royal troops at their beck and call. And the people and the representatives in Parliament would never stand for it. They always insisted that the British Army must be based upon the militia. That is to say, the armed citizens, the same people responsible for maintaining law and order, with the ward and watch to keep cities safe and towns at night, and the hue and cry to respond to crime. You ever thought, well, how did people respond to crime before there were police forces? Maybe you never wondered when there were police forces, but they were really a 19th century invention, and they weren't armed until well into the 20th century in Britain or in Canada. No, it was the citizens who were expected to have weapons and use them against criminals and especially against would-be tyrants. And that's why, on both sides of the Atlantic, the Quartering Act was seen not as some sort of regional, or you could call it an ethnic quarrel if you think Americans are a separate ethnicity by then. It was seen as an old argument about whether, if push came to shove, it would be the government or the citizens who possessed overwhelming force. And the answer that the Americans gave was a very British answer. It must be the citizens. And that is why in our Right to Bear Arms project, and we shall be off shortly to England to film key parts of it, we're talking about this deep-seated, fundamental, back to Magna Carta belief that it was not safe to be disarmed and to have the state have all the weapons. Magna Carta itself would never have come about. It wasn't generated by a protest movement, by academic philosophy. It was generated by armed citizens, commoners and nobles alike, bringing the king to heel because they were stronger than he was. And that's why the Quartering Act underlines that it was not a matter of the Americans establishing some new system of government, having some weird outbreak of libertarianism, but of them standing on their ancient rights as Englishmen. And those ancient rights are our rights too. That's why we're doing the project, and that's why I hope you'll support it.
Thanks for watching. Click here to never miss a Rebel update. Want even more of the Rebel? Well, click here to become a premium member.